And we are live once again. It is a chilly morning here just outside of Montreal. Welcome everybody to Raising Multilinguals Live. -8. -8. I had to unscrew the hose outside is all frozen so that I don't have a flood in here. So I don't know whereabouts everybody else are watching from, but welcome. Let me throw this to Uta in Europe.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Utelima Riebold from Uta's International Lounge, and I'm connecting from the Netherlands. And we have a guest connecting from another side of the world today.
Yes, that is why we are doing it early in the morning, because as you can see, our special guest today, you can see he's Japanese. This is Professor
That's
Tim
obvious,
Keeley.
yes.
Dr. Keeley has been living in Japan for a long time, and he is a professor in social linguistics, if I'm not mistaken.
Cross-cultural management.
Okay, so I get them all mixed up, but it's okay. But we've known each other for a long time now, and we've had heated debate at times with a beer in our hands. So a good friend. Thank you very much for taking the time, Tim, to join
my pleasure.
Raising Multilinguals Live today.
My pleasure.
Heated debates we've had. How many years ago was that in Fukuoka?
That was 7 years ago.
So we've known each other for at least 7 years and more through our mutual friend Richard Simcott, who organizes the Polyglot Conference. And Tim just came back from the Polyglot Conference a few days or maybe a week or two ago, right? Mm-hmm. How was the event this time?
Oh, it was really great. The venue was very nice, right there in the center of Budapest, in a very beautiful building. I forget the name of it, but it's really a great venue, and a lot of people came to enjoy it. And we had 20-minute talks, it was kind of like a TED Talk thing, only one going at a time. That made it quite interesting.
Very nice. The 10th anniversary of the Polyglot Conference. So really shout out to Richard, if ever you're watching this. And once again, shout out to everybody else watching us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn Live. So our topic that we had a heated debate on is what we're talking about today, is accents, but specifically, Tim says native-like accent can be achieved at any age. So let's start really from the beginning. Tim, what made you focus on accents per se in your research over all these years?
Okay, so I have a lot of experience changing accents throughout my life, because I've lived around the world besides Japan. I've went to school in Colombia, in Bogota. And at that time, I changed my accent from Cubano, from Cuban accent, to Colombiano. And so I went from really sharp accent to one that's much easier to understand. And then I was in Brazil. Then I studied in French in Switzerland. And later I was studying Slavic literature in Poland. I'd spent time in Yugoslavia and also the Soviet Union. And so I was constantly studying different languages and dealing with different accents. And then finally, I wound up in Japan in 1981. I've been here for 42 years. And I started, let's say 10 years later, 1990, when I started to lecture in cross-cultural management at a university here in Japan. And over the years, I had a lot of foreign students from mainland China, Taiwan, mainland China, and other countries in Asia. But I noticed amongst the Chinese students that there were some students who sounded like Japanese even after a couple of years here. And others had been here for 6, 7, or 8 years. And just as they opened their mouth, 2 words, 3 words, I knew exactly that they were Chinese and not Japanese. So, I mean, I'm a Japanese citizen, but people always question that for my looks, So
I wonder why.
But sometimes I can tell by physical characteristics, not so much just innate characteristics, but what happens to your facial expression by growing up in a certain culture. Wow. So I can often distinguish between Chinese, Japanese, Korean, just by their stance.
So we're already kind of diving into the deep end, but let's rewind just a little bit for the sake of everyone. You were born and raised in the U.S., correct?
Yes, I lived in the U.S. till age 18,
Yeah.
1974.
And before that, were you interested in languages?
Oh yes, oh yes.
And,
Okay, so
and
yeah, well, I think we can go back to around 1961 or 62. So I was a young child, around 6 years old, started listening to a shortwave radio,
my
advanced
goodness.
technology at that time, to languages all around the world, and I was
Mhm.
always fascinated by the sound of languages. And also, I've tend to be when I grew up in an area in South Florida where there were a lot from the late 60s, mid 60s, late 60s, etc. Um, there are a lot of Cubans, but there are also a lot of Florida crackers. And and I can even change my accent in English because when I hung out with my other friends, I spoke like this.
Oh,
And so it depends. I had various accent at home, accents with certain friends. I always thought it was great. I didn't see it as making fun of him. If when I was with them, I spoke like they did. For me, that was natural.
Yeah.
And so I've always been interested in it.
nice, nice. So you have a keen ability to notice the differences in accents,
Hmm.
and so this is what we're sort of naming as native or native like accent. How about we start with just like a very very like a good definition or characterization of what do you mean by native like, because
Okay,
native
so
speaker, it can be
okay, so
wide
let me
range.
interject here first that you might hear my accent change as we speak.
Sounds very
Even in
Japanese right
English.
now, just
I
about now.
know, I know, I know. Okay, so native like is sounding like a native,
Okay,
but
but
then
who's
you have to
native?
define native. So
There
Yeah.
you go.
native is native is a very ambiguous word, isn't it?
Yes.
So native English speaker, you have literally thousands of different types of accents in amongst native speakers, even in North America, right? So it's not we don't of course Great Britain and Australia, New Zealand, and so on. So it's basically when I say native like, I mean you have a reference group.
Yeah.
And you speak like the people in the reference group, and it feels natural to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. So it can be any reference group. It can be also a group that has other languages as their first languages,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
have a high proficiency in the language and sound
Well,
native. Like I use brackets to be
that is a
careful.
majority in the world in the case of
Yes,
English, because there are
exactly,
more non-native speakers of English than native speakers. The same,
exactly.
especially for French. Okay, so yeah, there's an international way of speaking English. You can go to international schools
Yeah,
around the world,
yeah.
and you can sort of notice this. They sort of have developed this kind of accent, international school way of speaking English.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
So when I say native, like sound like a native.
mm,
Let's just say sound like the people
that you
who
want
you're
to imitate.
identifying with. You're
There you
identifying with.
go. Wow. There you go. So
Exactly.
it is tailored to your living context,
Hmm.
and your aims with
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
languages
yeah,
per
yeah.
se,
Definitely,
right?
definitely. And then we code switch, right? So if you look
Mhm.
at
Hmm.
if you look at Obama, he would have never been president if he couldn't code switch,
Mm.
Yeah.
right? So he talked one way to an African American audience, et cetera, and then he spoke in a different way to people from Boston or New York, somewhere, wherever. He always adjusted, and so because people assume a lot of things when they hear your accent,
Absolutely.
and there are prestige accents, and there's not so prestigious accents in every language. And
All right. So your personal interest in your upbringing um, led you to have a keen interest in accents, but for the general public, for the everyday learner, for example, we all say that accents is not important. I mean, what's important is
Meaning.
conveying the meaning, getting the communication across. So
hmm,
why bother?
right.
Why bother
Okay,
with
well, why bother? Okay, so you kind of answered it with the last part of your question. If getting the message across is important, you have to realize that it depends on how much your accent affects communication.
Hmm.
All right.
Because there are people who, let's say, a native speaker of English, comes to mind is a situation when I was in Laos, and this woman said she was with a group of tourists from the UK. She was North American, and she said, "Oh, I just can't understand this person, da 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 da, their accent in English."
Hmm.
Okay, so it's her mother tongue. I have no problem doing, but some people are like that. So the closer you imitate somebody, and that's even amongst monolinguals, because we have the chameleon effect. So
Mhm.
for the greatest communication, you're imitating body language, speech habits, the choice of vocabulary, on and on.
Yeah.
So the more that you're imitating the person you're speaking to, and when I say imitating and mimicking, I don't mean in a negative way. Actually, it can be very positive. And it's very complex. Okay, we know there's some situations where you're
So
trying to imitate, and people, yeah,
imitation is the best form of flattery.
yes, that's
Right?
true. But also, it can be it can be dangerous at times too.
Of course.
Okay,
But
so yeah,
yeah, but
so
what?
basically, yeah,
Mhm.
mhm.
Sorry. No,
Yeah,
please.
okay. So I just wanted to say that. So why? Well, because if communication is important, it improves communication.
But that's a
There's
threshold, right? If
yeah,
once you
there's a
pass that,
threshold. There's
once you
exactly.
pass
So
that
some
threshold,
people, I
why
mean,
aim for native like?
no, I know. I had a friend who, whenever he spoke English, it was very obvious that he was French, and he didn't want to change it because he said the girls liked it. So
Yeah, and then there we would be again in the part of talking about accents, where there are accents that are more prestigious, even foreign accents that are more accepted, and others that are less accepted by that group that maybe you are in. But I wanted to come back to what you just said about the mimicking effect, or the chameleon effect that you just mentioned, because and that's a question. It's something that I observe is mainly what those who use that target language as an additional language, or who have learned it at a certain time, they have this kind of mimicking effect. They try to mimic the others, but not those who have the language, let's say language yellow, as their first language or their most dominant language, or if we want to use again this term, that are native speakers of the language. They don't tend to mimic the others in order to,
well,
find a
actually,
common ground, or not.
actually, the chameleon effect is
It's both ways.
well studied amongst
Yeah.
either monolinguals or people who share the same background. And yeah, no, they do. I mean, but what you're saying, I agree with what you're saying. I think people who become multilingual have a lot of experience, and communicating various languages and adapting. They have formed identities, linguistic and cultural identities. I mean, I have many identities as a Colombian, as a Pole, as a on and on, as a Japanese, as a Chinese, as Thai, etc. And they've formed these identities which they can slip into role, just like the whole world's a stage, and now I'm Japanese, or now I'm Colombian. And so people who have experience, they're more likely to demonstrate the chameleon effect. That's true. Very much true. That's why, I agree with that. Yeah, they're definitely, going back to my interest in accent here in my research, since I noticed that Chinese students it spoke Japanese differently, some very much like their Japanese colleagues, and some very different. Then I went about doing a academic study on it.
Wow.
Yeah, and to look at the factors, because I knew the factors in my head. So I found the best instrument to do that. And it was I looked at all the when I say instruments, I mean questionnaires, surveys. I looked at all the questionnaires or surveys that are used to screen out bad candidates for being sent overseas. When a company sends an executive overseas, they want to make sure they can adapt to the new culture and new environment. And so there's a battery of questions. And I'm in human resource management, so cross-cultural management. So I know this field too. So my research focused for the last 12 years has focused on these psychological and attitudinal factors which determine your ability to sound like a native in, native like speech, good communication, as well as adapt to the culture, function well in a foreign culture. It's not so much the accent. No, let me take that back. I'm mainly looking at the factors that will determine whether you can succeed in a different culture and learn the language well and communicate well in the language. Okay. So, but the accent's a part of it, but not the main focus.
Fantastic. Then, before we get into all the attitudes, the affective factors, I think you mentioned, or the psychological and social factors. The biggest, I think, I would say controversy in the area of accents is that there's a biological factor or the physiological factor around that. Let's start with that part and see if we can break the preconceived notions in this area. So, what kind of changes do you think occur in the brain, young, old? And there's this thing called the critical period hypothesis. That's the biggest, I think, theory out there that tells us that adults cannot learn good accents, right? Yeah. So, what are the things that happen, at least in a nutshell, in the neuroscience part before we get into the psychological part?
Well, in the area of neuroscience, you go back a couple of decades, and there was a revolutionary change. There was a realization that the brain is constantly restructuring. In other words, you'll have neuroplasticity. This plasticity, the ability to the brain's ability to adapt. And so there was that realization. And before then, people thought, no, it becomes wired. It's like fixed wires. Nothing changes, etc.
And that change came about when? Because I thought when I was younger, they always thought, if you have trauma to your brain or something, your brain cells don't regenerate, and then there's
no, untrue. All the way until your death. The speed of regeneration and the extent of actually what happens is you have, as you're young, you have much greater pruning. Pruning means like you have all these connections, and the pruning is much faster when you're young. As you're older, they remain longer. So even though you may not use certain facilities in your brain, so you don't do certain actions or whatever, you lose it slower than you do when you're a child. The change is much faster when you're a child. The pruning is much greater. So something taught to a child can be lost much quicker.
So it can be lost much quicker. But they also learn much quicker, right? When they're young, as the brain cells are developing.
No, actually they learn much slower. No, children learn. I mean, you just look at the data. That's misinterpretation of the data.
Okay.
That look. You have kids you're raising at multilinguals. You can see how long it takes them to get certain concepts. As an adult, which you have much greater analytical ability and a host of information.
Yeah.
Experience.
All right. We're getting into some juicy stuff. This is fun. So okay. You want to say something?
Yes, but I would like to come back to the accents, because we were not saying the earlier the better. Years ago, the earlier children learn languages, the better, with regards also of accents, which is also something that the parents are very much worried about. They say, okay, let's just put every language that we have here in our neighborhood or in our life in the brain of the child. I always think like a funnel on their head. Let's put everything in, because there is a window that will close. And we know now that this window is just not closing.
Sorry, that triggers me.
I know, yes. Me too. Every time I hear it.
It's a misunderstanding. I mean, sorry, but to me, it's kind of laughable, considering that at age 18, I spoke English y cubano. Yo hablaba español como un cubano. That's how I spoke Spanish. Pero yo puedo hablar español como un colombiano también. And I can speak argentino and porteño. I can change my accent in many languages. All these are learned past 18.
Exactly. Yes.
And I speak tonal languages that are like I can speak Vietnamese, which is a real tough one. I can, on the phone, I could pass for a Thai. so all these are learned later in life. To me, from my experience, it's just laughable. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I don't want to
Yes.
offend anybody, but I'm offended by the constant belief, and people keep saying this when it's just doesn't stand up to reality. Now,
Exactly.
and this is where I agree with Tetsu. Children are much more flexible in their identities. So you can see your children happily can relate to various cultures and languages and are great imitators, much more than adults who tend to have more fixed identities. So in observation wise, yes, we can conclude, we would conclude that, oh yeah, children, they're much, not faster learners, but they're much, let's say, faster or better imitating accents and sounding like a native.
Mm-hmm.
At that age. I mean, a 5-year-old's going to speak like a 5-year-old. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not better language learners. They can't learn like you and I can a certain language. We have all that, cognitive development and background, etc. But they can imitate usually much easier because they're more flexible. But if you can be flexible in your culture and linguistic identity, you're much more powerful than a child is.
Okay.
Except no, I would say that a child is still perhaps more tends to be better in the sense that they're more flexible, and it takes a big effort to be flexible. I spent my whole life becoming flexible.
So or staying flexible.
You're staying flexible. Thank you. Staying.
That would be probably the key to it all. Stay flexible as a child, and don't see the new language as something that you cannot achieve. Maybe because you think of what these people, I'm not going to repeat what I just said before that triggered you.
The window has closed.
Yeah, the window has closed.
But the interesting thing about the CPH is that the critical period hypothesis, it dealt with first language acquisition.
Yes. Yeah.
Not second language acquisition.
No.
It was saying, okay, so you'll have the mythical child raised by wolves, and they at 6 years old they try to learn a language. Well, the problem there is the psychological and emotional.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, and also, of course, the development that takes place in the brain as you learn the languages and parsing sound and on and on. You don't have that. I mean, these are important factors.
All right. Well, so far so good with everything. I'm getting flashbacks of our debates back in those years. This is great.
Yeah, but I really don't think we disagree in the end.
No. So really, I'm just I'm almost being a devil's advocate here for some of these stuff. But so before we go over to the affective part, the psychological part, you've already touched upon a few things to supplement your arguments. But to really, let's say, put the last nail in the coffin here. We know that kids have their brain development is extremely fast at the beginning years of life, up to 6 years old or something, where their brain is basically formed, like 90%, 90%. And you mentioned the word pruning, where there's lots of activities going on. There's lots of neurons, synapses forming and pruning. That's throwing away the dead leaves, so to speak. And then later in life, it's much more stable, but there is still synapses getting created and eliminated that continues throughout life, this neuroplasticity that you talk about. So it's not debated that there is this period of early and rapid development, and then there's a latter period of more stable development.
Yeah, well, obviously.
So
yeah,
I guess to really put the last nail in the coffin is that this difference does not affect
no,
accents,
the only difference is
to acquire accents.
The only difference is as a very young brain, infancy, let's say 1, 2, 3 years old in particular, they don't need to pay attention in order to have change occur. And the older as you go through the years, it doesn't necessarily mean the older you get, but from a certain age, attention is required to cause change. So,
but that is not a physiological thing, or is it? Are you saying that it is?
Well, I mean, it's funny when we talk about psychological, physiological, they're the same thing, aren't they? I mean, if every thought I have, and everything we do, there's a corresponding action going on in our nervous system connected to the brain. So I mean, we can this is physical, this is psychological. But the point is that when you hit a certain age, it's kind of gradual. The older you get, the more you need to pay attention in order to cause change.
All right. So, are we ready to get into the next portion? I guess the more effective portion, the more psychological portions of language learning. Now that we've established that it's mainly not the actual brain physiology per se, but it's all the other parts that come later in life.
Attitudinal and psychological attitudinal factors.
So let's get into later in life. What are the different difficulties that we face when we start learning additional languages? Just as a whole.
Depends on the person, I think. They're different for everybody. Okay, so what I mean by that, let's talk about draw some parallels. I know that in your house you see drum sets and all different kinds of musical instruments and such.
Yes.
And so you're not only keen on raising your children speaking 5 languages like a native, but also playing the different instruments like a pro. Okay, so people who have never cultured their musical ability would find it hard perhaps to pick up a guitar or piano at a later stage. But if they did and they stuck with it and they really had the passion, they could learn at any time, right?
Indeed.
But if from a very young age, your dad has drum sets and all these other things, and you jam together, you're obviously going to have that experience, which lays the groundwork for being able to pick up new instruments in the future. Yeah. So if I look at my case, I was always fascinated by languages, as I mentioned, around age 6, listening to them. But I only spoke English and Spanish growing up. And my Spanish started getting good from about 13 or 14 years of age, hanging out with Cubans in South Florida. And then, of course, 18 when I moved to Colombia and went to university in Bogota. Okay. So age 18, Bogota. It's 1975. And you don't have internet or any of that stuff. So I was thrilled that there was a Alliance Française. I could go study French there. A Goethe Institute, where I started studying German. Instituto Brasileiro de Línguas, where I could study Portuguese. So I was studying French, German, and Portuguese in Spanish. And so that's where my polyglot, journey really took off from age 18 like that. And so my brain, my whole life, I've always been learning multiple languages and using them. I went to school in Spanish and French and in Polish and studied Russian literature or Slavic literature, trying to say Chinese literature here in Japan. So Japanese and Chinese, I've worked in Thai and other languages. I've even worked in German. So, I've done this my whole life. So you can say that I've nurtured my psychological and attitudinal factors and physically. I have a lot of plasticity in my brain. It's like a muscle. All right. So my brain is quite flexible at age 67. I think if it measured, I think I could beat out people in their 30s. Because there's a lot of research on this, because I'm constantly using various languages. And even I lecture in Japanese with my students. Normally I speak Chinese, Vietnamese, Nepali, Korean. So I'm always been using various languages even in one day. And so I have certain strength. Okay, so that's me. Yeah. Now you take somebody who's never learned a foreign language, who has a very strong regional accent, and they don't even change their accent in their own language. So let's say they're from Boston, and then they moved to Austin, Texas, when they were 40 years old, and they still speak like somebody from Boston, even though they've been in Austin for 10 years now. from 40 to 50. Well, a child is not going to do it. A child's going to make a choice and either pick a neutral accent or imitate the locals and
Yes.
such. So these are attitudinal. It's just, you could say, you're rusty at a certain age, it becomes very difficult. But it's like saying it becomes difficult to start working out and toning your body and doing some sports or something, or learning a musical instrument. Let's not say that language is something totally different, which from those activities.
Yeah, so you have to keep on working out and using the languages, or if you are someone who grew up in that part, like the example that you just made with the person in Boston, it's hone a little bit the skills of listening skills towards other kind of intonations and everything, because well, the accents. I must say that when you Google on anything about accents, you get to find pages with dialects and accents and intonations and everything. So accent, what is accent? I don't want to go into the details here, but maybe you can say a little bit what is meant with accent. You said it slightly before, but
well, accent. I mean, that's a very misunderstood term, because people understand. I mean, somebody will say, "Oh, yeah, you don't have an accent." Well, everybody has an accent. I mean, accent is simply a way of speaking. It's a certain pattern. It's reference groups have a certain pattern of speaking, and you're imitating it. So when people say, "Oh, it speaks without an accent," it means speak without a foreign accent. But even in a monolingual situation, right? We're all speaking our native tongue. We had to choose one. So, and we're talking about prestige accents. So, for example, RP, received pronunciation, or Queen's English, is perhaps the most prestigious English accent there is. But even British people, very few British people speak with RP. And they're usually of the high upper class. And some people, even Brits at times, feel they should in a certain situation, and they try to imitate it, but they feel a little bit false doing so.
Yes, and it's actually and I think it's, sorry if I interrupt, and it's actually something that we don't want to emphasize here today, right? That we want to achieve that kind of accent, or that we say people should.
Yeah, no, I'm not necessarily advocating it. You have a choice. It's your choice to make.
You have a choice, exactly.
And actually, I advise people, foreigners learning English, not to try to imitate RP, because when they blow it, they sound very pretentious.
Yes.
And it's same for Brits. It's same for monolingual Brits, British people, who they feel false. And when they don't get it right, it's like, what are you trying to talk posh like that? It's like, it's taken negatively, unless you do it really well. And even if you do it really well, then people will just wonder about your background. That's one of those, if it's not a prestigious accent, it's not such an issue. But when it's a prestigious accent, I mean, when I speak German, for example, I usually imitate Bayerisch, because I worked in Wendelstein. I kind of is ich möchte jetzt Deutsch sprechen. I sort of think about I want to speak German, but I lived in Wendelstein, worked in Wendelstein, a small city by Nuremberg, and also my first German exposure really was in Switzerland, Schweizerdeutsch. So I have more of so I have more of that influence on my German. But I can change to Hochdeutsch. Ja, ich kann da. I can change it. But what I gravitate towards, right? But that's not a prestigious accent, so nobody gets on my case for sounding a little bit Bayerisch or something. But when you try, if you're trying to get the most prestigious accent in any language, and you blow it, I mean, it's most obvious in the case of English RP.
Yes. Yeah. But also, but I heard it also in other languages, like in French. If you have the very strong Parisian accent, and then after a few sentences, it all comes down, and you say, actually, people get disoriented if you try to keep it up for, let's say, 3-4 sentences, and then the discussion becomes more in depth. And if you cannot hold it, that's terrible. And that was one of the questions that we had, right, Tetsu? Shall I ask it now?
Sure.
So when what if others' perspective as us not authentic, or what if others perceive us as not authentic when using a native-like accent or whatever kind of accent that we are having in a given language. That is actually what we are talking about now.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's an issue, sometimes it's not. So often it's an issue for the person themselves. They lose confidence and they don't feel authentic. So it's usually more of an issue for the person trying to imitate a certain accent than it is for the ones listening, especially if they know that that person is not a native speaker, so they're not going to have certain expectations. They're not going to be so strong. But again, what I'm saying, if you're trying to imitate Queen's English, and the people are kind of why you even British people, they're why are you trying to do that? So, but then you get the issue of not why are you speaking posh?
Yes.
So and it's not just the accent. In that case, you're not going to say things like if I was you, you're going to have to say if I were you. You have to get the same grammar and everything. Otherwise, it doesn't mix. And people using a certain phrases which don't fit with the posh RP. So
yes, a certain words, right? But I saw this in interview settings. Yeah, you hire a person, and then you have a different candidates, and then you have one that really sounds good, and you see, oh, they are not. They speak it since they are adult at some point, but actually you couldn't place them. You don't know exactly where to place them, and that then makes you wonder why. And then maybe you see them in the corridor after the interview, and this happened to me. And then I talked to this person, and she had a completely different accent. So I was like, oh my gosh, but this had the effect that we did not trust this person. Okay, so
I mean, you have to watch out for that.
Yeah, she had a great repertoire of accents, but this is.
Yeah, I'm laughing because it happens to me. As I said, my accent in English can go all over the place because I imitate what I hear.
Yeah.
And so, so I'm in Delhi for a couple of days, and already, so yeah, so everything it happens to me, and because of the chameleon effect, if I'm speaking with people who have a similar accent. And when I say similar, what I grew up with, so I grew up with a number of accents, but let's say is sort of neutral Midwestern accent in Florida, which is it's hard to define. But if they have a similar, let's say just general North American accent, it's easier for me. When I hear other accents, I start to imitate it. So, and I don't have a feeling of falseness because I'm at peace with all my linguistic and cultural identities. I'm at peace of being let's bring race into it, a white Asian. So, I consider myself, I'm the opposite of, ABCs, so American born Chinese or something. And so, because 42 years, yes, I didn't grow up here as a child. I was 25 years old when I came here. But for me, I still sought to integrate.
Yes.
And it's had great, I'm open to being influenced by the culture and language, etc. So I have a very strong Japanese identity. And so I'm comfortable with all that. So if some people are not, okay, that's their issue. Okay, I can give you a good example where people are not comfortable with it. I was speaking with an English teacher here in Japan, and I was talking about.
She's Japanese. A Japanese that's teaching English.
I'm sorry, and he was an American.
Okay.
Teaching English here at the same university I was at. Okay, so now I taught in Japanese. I was teaching. I had nothing to do with the English teaching here in Japan at university. Okay, so I was studying, of course, as I said, the psychological factors and attitudinal factors which affect your ability to function in a foreign language and culture. And so I was pointing out that there were some North Americans here in Japan who were always on TV as commentators. And some of them had people say, oh, they speak fantastic Japanese. And the reason that people felt that way is not just the words they said, but the way, their body language. and their speech habits. So if they're going to disagree, they would say, okay? So they're not just going to say, they're just going to say, yeah, watashi no iken ga chigaimasu. My opinion is they're going to say, they're going to do that, say, suck in the air and lean back, and it really hurts me to disagree with you, but I'm going to tell you that I'll say something which sounds like I'm agreeing with you, but I don't agree with you at all. So they're going to do that whole acting, and so therefore they sound native. Their communication is more native-like. So you say, going back to that question, why? The question why? Well, when we talk about accents, I'm really talking about everything there, the prosody, your body language, all that together.
Yeah.
And the closer, the studies show, the closer that you sound like the reference group, the better you speak the language.
Yeah.
Grammar, vocabulary, etc. Yeah. You just suck it in, you absorb it more. When otherwise you're using too much of your intellect. You're trying to speak the language through your brain and say your heart.
Yeah. And you think in the language, you have this inner voice in the language.
You react.
I think this is one of the other questions, Titsu, that we have.
Yeah, I mean, you get that way, and you're in Japan long enough, and you're talking on the phone, and you're doing this.
Yes, you do that. Yeah, it's the gestures, it's the mimicking that you mentioned before. This chameleon effect that goes beyond the accents, but really with everything.
Yeah, it's the whole package.
Yes, it's the whole package.
Krashen and Kaufman will be nodding along right now if you're listening.
Yes, I thought the same now.
Yeah, I was just seeing, Stephen Krashen go, yes. Don't. It's not the intellect, like you say.
Yeah.
Don't think through the grammar and be mechanical about it. Yeah.
And this is
you have to. And Kaufman would say, "Who cares? Who cares if you make the errors? Nobody cares."
Right. So. It's your analytical and your emotional working together. Your right brain and your left brain. So the left brain type of the analytical learner, if they're really stuck on that, then usually they have a very strong accent. Their communication is somewhat stilted. You understand all the words they're saying, but it doesn't come across the same way.
Yeah.
Just like I demonstrated there when you're disagreeing in Japanese. Okay, the words could come out, but it's those expressions in the speech habits and social norms and all that together, and those are related to emotions. And then that's more your kind of the right brain. So they have to work together. Now, in my case, over the years, I don't know how it developed, from what age, maybe from a young age, but I'm very analytical, but very emotional at the same time. So it becomes, I think, powerful combination when I went to learn a new language.
It's somehow this child kind of approach to languages that we mentioned before, right? If you stay this curious and don't think too much about how you would sound like, you just imitate, you mimic, you do what others do. You have the same kind of facial expression. It's so nice to see, right, with very, very young children, how fast they can switch from one kind of expression in their face to the other, whilst changing also language and body language and posture and everything.
Yes, and that's exactly why the reason people say, "Oh, children learn languages faster."
But you can stay a child, can't you? Also?
That's the impression we get, because they are communicating better by imitation. But when it comes to total vocabulary and grammatical correctness, no way. As an adult, you can learn much, much faster.
Yes,
you have the potential to. Let's put it that way. Okay. There are no physiological barriers there.
Do you know Professor Ojima from Yokohama?
Shiro Ojima?
Yeah, Shiro Ojima. Ojima Shiro sensei.
Ojima Shiro.
Yeah, we had him on maybe last year.
Last year.
Yeah, and he talked about how children acquire languages better over time and a long time with massive exposure, whereas immigrant families that arrive, let's say in the U.S. or somewhere, the parents, they by necessity, they have to learn really quickly, and they have a better, they have a whole baggage of knowledge and analytical skills to learn very quickly on the short run. So that's sort of how he put it.
But I like also this, like we have put here in the question, how important the imitation and empathy actually are in acquiring the the accents, but also the whole language. Let's put aside the accents only. It's the rest.
How
of the
important?
language.
How important? It's everything.
It's very, yeah.
It's everything. I mean, that's a nutshell. So what facilitates in the end, or at the, let's say in the core part, what facilitates the ability to sound like the people in your reference group? I'm not even going to say accent, okay, but sound and communicate like people in your reference group. Well, imitation, obviously. And then what does imitation require? It requires empathy. What is empathy? It's understanding other people's feelings and being able to reflect them. That's everything. You got it right there. So how important is everything? If you don't have the empathy and imitation, because if you look at the case of autism, when you see that lacking, in the case of autism, sometimes in certain spectrums of autistic spectrums, you'll have that lack of empathy and the ability to understand somebody's perspective. Okay, and due to that factor, you get stilted speech. You have speech development problems, communication development problems. I mean, there's a researcher by the name of Tomasello, and he talks about language acquisition through joint attention. So at a certain age, as a child shares your attention towards some object, and you start to communicate in that way, then that's where they really acquire, speech patterns, grammar, everything. Is so that joint attention and that empathy.
Yeah.
Okay, you're connecting.
Yes, this is why also for parents, I'm thinking of the parents who are maybe following us or teachers. This is why the personal interaction with the other person who speaks the target language is so important. Not, putting children in front of a screen and following their. I mean, that can help to some extent also to build a receptive vocabulary or knowledge of the language. But what is more important in order to then communicate effectively and this,
I think we can talking about this in raising children. I think Tetsu could tell us a lot from his experience, but just my observation of Tetsu's children is that Tetsu has creates situations where they have emotional bonds in all the languages. Okay, so English, Montreal, English, French, Spanish nanny, coming to Taiwan and Japan. So they have those human relationships. Somebody's important. And then when you do, then they learn to, those are the reference groups, so they can imitate very, very well because they have that connection, the human connection. So that's the hard part. That's learn with your head and the heart. That's the heart. But I don't think that, and it's a great way. So I think, when you raise your children that way, they sound really good in the languages, because they're able to do that. Is that necessary in order to be able to do so in the future? No. If they lose interest, maybe, later in life, they never go to another language and then they want to learn Russian. No, it doesn't mean that they're going to pick up a good accent in Russian. They're not going to. It could even be more difficult because they're kind of expecting that human factor there, which has always been made for them. It's been natural. Now they have to create it themselves, right?
Yes, to find themselves.
It can be an extremely powerful tool, but that's a child's choice as they grow up, whether it's important or not. And if you don't, the thing with a child, if you don't keep showing that the language is important, they'll just drop it and forget it quickly.
Yeah, but
depends on the age, though. I mean, if you drop it at 5 or 6, I agree, it'll fade away.
That's what I'm thinking in terms. When I say child, I'm referring to preschool, especially like that. Once you start using a language in primary school, middle school, etc. You'll have it for always.
Life.
But when you're talking about 2, 3, 4, or 5 years old, I mean, I see it in my own children. Okay, so for us, it's mainly English and Japanese. My children are strongly Japanese mother tongue speakers. Their mother's Japanese.
Yes, but I would like to add, even if a child, due to situations, in our situation, it was because we moved from Italy to the Netherlands. One language is not as dominant in our, or not so, the majority language that is spoken every day, all of a sudden goes into the background. This doesn't mean that they will forget it or that it will be lost. They can always
No, not
reactivate it
necessarily.
later.
Yeah,
Right?
and
So
again, that
happens.
depends on the individual too.
Yes.
And there's a lot of emotional factors there.
Yes, and the emotional factor, this is what I shared in other interviews already, and Tetsu knows it, that happened to my son, that after, when he was 11, he asked again, oh, can we speak Italian again? Because it was this emotional bond to Italy, to everything that has to do with Italy, Italian culture, and the way his mom sounds in Italian, so he likes that. So he wanted me to speak Italian again with him. So this is not something that is lost, it's something, but the bond, I think the link, which I really like what you just said, is on an emotional basis.
Yeah,
If
definitely.
someone would have, because I tried the other approach, I said, listen, we are going to Italy to spend the holidays there. It's better that you reactivate. No, this didn't work at all.
No.
But if you have peers, if you have great Italian food, or mama who's speaking Italian, that was much more convincing than all the rest. So that is a little tip, right?
Yeah, definitely.
The emotional card.
And to demonstrate the emotional side, I write this account in my memoir. When I was in Colombia, I met Pedro from Florida, and he grew up in a Cuban family in Central Miami in the 60s, and so he didn't speak any English when he went to primary school at age 6, and so it was quite a traumatic experience for him, because they had actually moved to an area where there was not so dominant Cuban speakers. Still there all over in South Florida, and it's changed. The situation now is quite different. You have people from all over Latin America. Anyway, he said it was a very traumatic experience for him, and so he started only speaking English, and he dropped speaking. He's kind of rejected his Cuban heritage, and so he was there. We were both age 18 in Bogota, and I had a much better Cuban accent and Colombian accent than he did. And that was the only accent he had till he was age 6. And he actually had the worst accent, worse in the sense of non-native, non-reference group. Even, no podía hablar cubano. He couldn't speak his Cuban accent anymore, nor Colombian. Yeah. It sounded like, cuando él hablaba español, es como fuera un gringo así. I mean, it's almost kind of like a Southern accent.
Yes.
So yeah, it's did he forget? Well, he blocked it out emotionally.
It is a blocking out emotion. It's very interesting what you're saying, because I saw this also in refugee families who would try to sound like someone foreign speaking their language, which is very. I mean, that's another thing that's for maybe psychologists more something to study more in depth. But that is yeah.
So we all agree in the end, don't we?
Yes,
I was just going to say.
Well, I mean, there's no other way, because you have too much experience with languages not to agree.
That's a compliment. Thank you. We take it.
No. It's really great. It gives everybody hope that even as adults we are able to aim for what we want, and these are decisions that we can make in life to sound like a native or the reference group and it's not a physiological barrier that you cannot surmount.
Right. And again, you can be a monolingual and you face the same issues.
Indeed.
Yes, it's maybe we were talking about physiological barriers that there are. We were talking only about the brain, but actually also the apparato fonatorio. How do you call it? Where you talk. So I mean, there are sounds that are very difficult to articulate if you have a certain age, because the palate is hardened.
It's true. For example, I do language exchanges, and I do a language exchange with somebody from Vietnam, Spanish, and she can do. Corre, it's always at the end of the, like if she wants to hablar, even at the end, hablar. So whether you don't necessarily, but still you hear the R click, and so it comes out hablar, hablar. And it's not.
English R.
Yeah. So there is a physiological in the sense that you have to train your brain, because you have what you call brain traps. In other words, your brain, in order to understand all the accents that you hear, then you're going to have to any sound that is not important for meaning, like in Japanese L and R. Okay, there, like I had a student. Her name was Runa or Luna. I said, which do you prefer, Runa or Luna? She said, either way is okay. And Japanese can say Runa, Luna. They can do that, but it's not important to do it. Okay, and so what happens is when they hear, the lice and rice, etc., their brain doesn't distinguish it so easily. There's a brain trap, and it's the same as if, for example, you play the violin, and you're always putting your fingers close together like this. And then what happens is you can no longer individually move these fingers. When you move this one moves with it, because they're always moving together. And you have to, in order to fix that, you have to do exercises where you try to move one finger independently. So it's your whole body's like that. So it's your mouth too. Okay. Yes. And it's also your processing of sound. So and when at the beginning, I said, what happens when you're young, you don't really have to pay attention for the neural networks to form, to change. But as you grow older, you have to pay attention because it stabilizes. And so it's a way that your brain says, okay, if I keep changing to whatever, is around me, whether it's important or not, it's never going to stop. No. So your brain says, okay, so it's set up so you get it stable, and I hear something different, but I really don't pay attention. It's not important. I don't imitate it, etc. Okay. Yes, nothing's going to happen. All right. Yeah. So once you pay attention to it and you hear, you exaggerate the sounds and you work through it, then yes. And another good example is, and this shows the identification part, is here in Japan, there are professors at my university from Korea. And with Koreans in general, speaking Japanese, they sometimes have a hard time distinguishing, saying the word. When we say the k sound, is the naked K. In other words, we say, if we say daigaku, university, and gakusei, it's the same sound in Japanese. Daigaku, gakusei, we just put it up front. But in Korean, you can't do that. So Korean, all second sounds are what we call a little bit muddied. Okay, k with g sound. All right, and Korean does not have this g pure sound. It has a stronger one. So it has no equivalent to that at the beginning, but it has it in the second position. So the sound exists, but it's just where it is. It's just like the ngong, if people's ability to say a word that begins with ng. All right. So what happens? So I'll listen to one teacher say daigaku kakusei. You hear it? Instead of daigaku gakusei, they say daigaku kakusei. And they don't even hear that they're saying daigaku kakusei instead of daigaku gakusei. But there's another Korean teacher who never has that problem. And the guy that has the problem has been here for like 30 years. And the one that doesn't have it has been here like 8 or 9 years. But she identifies, she likes to pass as a Japanese. She identifies with Japan. She has a Korean identity and Japanese identity. She makes an effort to sound like her colleagues. Okay? So that's totally psychological. There is a physiological. He doesn't change because he hasn't paid attention to it and made an effort to change.
Yes. Yeah.
So is that psychological or is that physiological?
I think it's both.
Oh, it is, because there's no difference between them in the end. But you can control this physiological. See, it's not an unsurmountable physiological barrier, and that's where people make so many mistakes with the critical period hypothesis applied to second language. They don't realize that accents and all this is really about identity, imitation, and empathy, what we have written right in front of us.
Yes, indeed. And maybe also also people who don't want to make the effort because they say, "Oh, why should I bother?"
Why should
Right?
I
We had
bother?
this in another.
Or like my French friend, he picks up the girls with
Oh,
a
there
French
you go.
accent in English.
Yes, yes, or yeah. Well, it's often also that bothers the listener to this person, right? When you say, "My gosh, you're here 20 years and you still sound like someone who just arrived," then you become a bit like, why not? A little bit more of effort, but we never know where someone is coming from and what makes them maybe not hear the difference because the base language or the other languages that they have, this is just the same kind of sound, whether it's BP or whatever, or the T and TH in German, right? The th and the sound that not
Yeah.
all Germans can form. So that's
Well,
not, yeah.
now there are other physiological factors, changes in your brain that take place when you learn certain languages. For example, when you learn tonal languages, you have some changes the density of gray matter in certain areas of the brain that are responsible for distinguishing the sound and also meaning, the connection between them. And you can do an MIR scan, let's say, of a Chinese person. So native speaker, ethnically Chinese. And then you can do, and this is an experiment. I'm just giving you the synopsis of an experiment. And in this experiment, then they had Europeans who had learned Chinese as an adult. And so in the end, and all studies show this, is how your brain processes sound, etc., is not dependent on age of acquisition. It's dependent on level reached. And so those Europeans, ethnical Europeans, who had learned Chinese as an adult and spoke it very close to the way a native does, getting all the sounds right and everything, their brain scans were identical to the Chinese. Okay, so you have to reach. You're not going to hear the sounds. I mean, Tetsu, you speak a tonal language, Chinese, so your brain's already there. So what happens now when if you start learning like Thai? Kumpu Pasa Dai Mai? Do you know any Thai?
No, I don't know any Thai.
Okay, but if you learn Thai or another, that's going to help you, or even Cantonese. Okay, or what about Taiwanese? Thai?
Yeah.
You can speak Thai. Okay, so you have different tones in Taiwanese.
Yeah.
Right. So you have double. You have your Guoyu, your Mandarin, and your Taiwanese. Okay.
Not that I knew that difference before. I've never.
No,
of course, obviously, I've never thought.
No, you probably never noticed it, but they're different tones.
Yeah. I didn't even notice that in Japanese you put the verb at the end until I learned German.
Why?
It just happened.
I was learning German, and I was getting frustrated that you put the verb at the end when you have the auxiliary in the second place.
You do the same in Japanese.
I didn't notice. I just didn't notice.
Yeah, no, it becomes.
Never thought of that until I was 18.
Wow, that's something. Yeah. Yeah, you don't reflect on it. It's natural.
Exactly.
But that sets the stage for learning other languages. Not just syntactically, but in terms of like Ute was saying, in terms of having. You didn't say it exactly like this, but I think you meant this. You have this inventory of sounds because you speak this language that has those sounds, absolutely. And so you can carry out. For example, Nepali and Thai, and they distinguish between certain sounds for T and the D, different ones, and the K and the G and such. Ga, like in Thai you have the word ga. It's not a G, it's not a K, but you get foreigners in Thailand say, "Oh, I'm going to Koh Samui." There's no ko. There's ga. It's a bai ga Samui. Okay, so they don't hear the sound. They don't see because it doesn't exist. But then you go to a different language, which is there, and so you already got it. You just have to realize, oh, it's the same sound. I'm going to use it.
Yeah. All right, we have to cut you off pretty soon.
Well, I'll never shut up. So. You get me going. I mean, it's midnight here, but you get me going, and I won't shut up.
Okay. No, but I have
you had your little siesta there before the show, so you're good to go for another 3 hours, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I have shared with those who are following us a link to your article is a native-like accent in a foreign language achievable, so that everyone can read that if they want to catch up.
Yeah, and
study a
also
little
if
bit.
they're interested in some of these subjects, if I can plug my own YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes.
So my YouTube channel
Absolutely.
is Polyglot
Yeah.
Dreams. Polyglot
Yes.
Dreams.
Yeah.
You can put in
Sure.
Tim Keeley. You could probably just go to YouTube and put in Tim Keeley, and you're going to see a lot of
Yes.
videos. But
Yeah,
a lot of those
same.
videos will be from my speeches at conferences and such. But you also see my own channel. And so my own channel, I just did finish a series on what we're talking about tonight. The first one was called The Importance of Ego Permeability. And the second was linguistic and cultural identity. And the third video is the chameleon effect. So I divided in three and made videos on it. So you can, so you can go and see those. And it's also blog on my website, which is also polyglotdreams.com.
Yeah.
All right. Let me put that in the comments right away.
Okay,
So
thank
it's
you.
YouTube
Yeah.
at Polyglot Dreams in plural.
.com. Yes.
And www.polyglotdreams.com.
And then just the YouTube channel Tim Keeley it's called Polyglot Dreams. It'll take you there, I'm sure. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's
been real
I know
fun.
it's late, but you're a youngster. You can take it, right?
Yeah.
I don't know when's the next time we're gonna have another nomikai, but hopefully sooner than later.
Oh yeah, but the Onyasai near us is closed. So hopefully there's still one in Tenjing we'll go to.
That's the place we had our last little drinking party.
Yeah, we gotta have that again. I love those spending that time with you.
Absolutely, and you gotta come over to Montreal, and we can take you around.
Oh yeah, okay, bien sûr, huh?
All right, and take out your Quebecois.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Tim, once again, and thank you to everybody who's watching us today.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you everybody for listening. I'm sure I spoke too much, and you probably don't want to hear me anymore. But
No.
No, we can't get enough of you. But we have to go. Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next month for the last session of the year.
Okay.
Bye-bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.